For a while now, I have been designing custom legendary creatures that could act as your commander to represent and bring elements from different Magic formats into the game of Commander. For each of them, the intent isn't that it completely changes the game into a different format, but brings elements of those formats into the game as long as they are on the battlefield. In this way, anyone who came here to play Commander can still remove your commander and get back to the normal game. Originally, I didn't think Oathbreaker would make a very good format commander. Oathbreaker as a format is extremely similar to Commander. It's basically the exact same game, except for instead of having a legendary creature as your commander, you have a planeswalker. Now in Commander, some planeswalkers just can be your commander, which I've always thought is a really weird rule, but whatever. As such, just having a planeswalker as your commander doesn't really make the game that much different from regular Commander. That's already possible. But the other thing that makes Oathbreaker different from Commander is that you get to choose a signature spell. This is an instant or sorcery spell that lives in your command zone alongside your commander, and you can cast it from your command zone, but only if you control your commander. Now that's getting interesting. So we could make a commander that at the start of the game you tutor up a spell, and that one exists maybe also in the command zone or just in exile for simplicity, and then you can cast it when it's in play. But does giving you that ability only make it feel like a different format? I say it doesn't. I think we need to let everybody do this. I also don't really want these cards to be exclusive to Commander. They're designed for Commander, but you could run them in other formats if you wanted to. So instead, let's make this an ETB effect, where once it enters, if you don't have a signature spell, anyone can search the library, choose a signature spell, and have it be exiled for the rest of the game to act as that spell. This is getting complicated. How do we actually word this to make it function? I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to have this spell exist in exile, allow you to cast it from exile, and then have it return there. For a while I was experimenting with maybe you don't actually cast it. Maybe you cast a copy of the spell. This would allow it to just stay in exile and you could just keep adding counters to it to represent tax. The reason I decided copying the spell doesn't work is because I don't want you to be able to just cast the spell. You need to be able to cast the spell this turn. Because if you just can cast the spell, that allows timing restrictions to be ignored. You could have your signature spell be an instant or a sorcery, and activated abilities are instant speed, so it doesn't really work. If I say you may cast the spell this turn, that means if it's sorcery, you cast it sometime once you have the stack cleared, when if it's instant, you can cast it right away. Originally I had it say, copy the card, you may cast the copy this turn. There's no precedent for that kind of effect, but that doesn't mean it couldn't work, right? Swimming through all the discussions about a difference between copying a card versus copying a spell, I eventually found the comprehensive rules and found one little line that says, a copy of a card that exists anywhere outside of the stack or the battlefield ceases to exist. And that means that when you would normally copy a card, it would actually cease to exist as soon as state-based actions are checked. But the ability that copied it lets you cast it before that happens. So it temporarily exists in your hand or in exile or whatever, and then would cease to exist if it had not moved to the stack before then. So saying, copy a card, you may cast it until end of turn, is something I could say, except for the copy would cease to exist as soon as the state-based actions are checked. So completely defeating the point. As such, I had to circle back around and figure out how to let you cast the card and then just let it go back to exile with more counters. Also, does everyone need to get their commander in play to be able to cast this spell? Well, since this only is accessible when you have your commander, making it so that your opponents need to also have their commander feels like kind of a lot of steps for everybody else. Better to just say, while you have your commander, everyone can cast their signature spell. That seems fair to me. So, how does it work? When this creature, and I am going to make them a creature, I could make them a planeswalker, but I don't see any reason to really pull that far away. This is supposed to still feel like Commander at the end of the day. So when this creature enters the battlefield, each player who does not control a spell in exile with a tax counter on it may search their library for an instant or sorcery card and exile it with a tax counter on it. Then they have an activated ability that costs X mana. Until end of turn, you may cast target spell with X plus 1 tax counters on it. When you do, as it resolves, exile it with X plus 3 tax counters on it. Any player may activate this ability. This took a lot of time to get the wording perfect. And while it's a lot tighter now, it's still pretty long-winded, so I'm glad we were able to get somewhere pretty elegant. Originally, it actually just always taxed you 2 at a minimum, because I couldn't figure out how to have it target only spells with tax counters without there being a minimum tax of 1, because X is the number of tax counters, right? But figuring out X plus 1 tax counters solved that issue, and I'm really happy I found that. I'm pretty sure I thought of that like 2 weeks ago when I first thought about doing Oathbreaker, but completely forgot, I guess. So right now it is exiling with X plus 3, which feels weird because you're supposed to add 2 tax every time. The idea is that X is how much tax you paid last time, and then you have to add 3 because there's always at least 1 to represent it as the signature spell. So what does this card like do for you? Why would you play this card? Well, it lets you tutor up a spell, and if you've built your deck around a really cool spell, then you have this advantage, and your opponents just tutor up an efficient spell, a cool spell, but not something that's important to them. That's a little bit of a fringe benefit, but honestly, I expect most of the time people are just gonna kill this guy. This creature kind of says each opponent tutors up a kill spell and kills me, which isn't very helpful, right? If they just die, they're just dead. There's a few things you could do to get around that. You can run some protection in your deck, and you make sure that you cast them when you have a lot of mana to spare. So I want them to be relatively cheap. I also want them to be pretty legitimately a threat. I really wanted this Oathbreaker nature to exist in the card. In Oathbreaker, there's nothing in the game that really represents being an Oathbreaker. I've been told that it's called that because every planeswalker is fighting every other planeswalker, and so they're all Oathbreakers because they're breaking like the Oath of the Gatewatch, I guess, which doesn't really make sense, but whatever. Instead, I want this to be this like big scary demon who's promising you power but is also going to kill you. So while I don't have any specific thing that's about breaking oaths, or like they can't be targeted by players who took that deal or something like that, instead, they're just a big threat. Originally, I had them as having flying, and I thought that felt good. Big demon, flying, pretty efficient stats because of how they come with the downside, which in this case is giving your opponent a spell. That seems really cool. But well, flying has nothing to do with Oathbreaker. If anything, it should be easier to kill this guy because planeswalkers can be directly targeted in combat. Instead, this guy would be harder to block, which would be kind of the opposite. So I still made them a very efficient body. They're an 8/8, originally 6/6 flyer, which I would much prefer, but 8/8 will have to do. But they have no evasion. You can chump block this guy for days. So I don't know how good they're gonna really be. Still pretty efficient though. 3-mana 8/8 is nothing to sneeze at. Is that the saying? That's a really dumb saying. Sneeze at? What? So there they are. I'm pretty happy with how they turned out. There was a lot of weird things I had to go through to make them work, and I'm not sure if I conveyed all of them in this video or not. For the most part, I had the concept down pretty quickly. The problem was the wording and the spacing and making it so that it looks like a real Magic card that you don't go cross-eyed looking at. For one thing, originally they were loyalty counters because I thought that was a little cute nod, but tax counters is just shorter words. For their name, I just wanted it to be as short as possible, so there they are. Anyway, I think that's it. I'm super excited for the next card in this series. We've got red and green to go to make this. If you have ideas for formats you'd like to see as commanders, especially if you think they feel red or green, I'd love to hear them in the comments. I've been Darcy Bits. I make custom cards all the time. Check out my other stuff. It's pretty fun, I think. Have a good night, everyone. I'll see you next time.